Hey, welcome back to another video. It is April yet again, which means we have hit the second anniversary for the IDW Sonic the Hedgehog book. Last year I talked about it in retrospect to its first year, and we're going to do the same this year, because I really like this book and I want to keep talking about it. I don't know if I will continue with the year-end retrospective kind of things, but I at least wanted to do this one to sort of talk in general about the storyline that started at the end that it just started when I was doing the first video and is still going on right now. The Zonbot storyline, as I've been calling it. Like I said, that one was still very much going on. It had just been started at the time I'd made the first video, and now a year later it is still going, but is very clearly starting to wrap up, and I feel like now is probably about a good time. It's been a very, very good arc, but it has been going on for a year, and in comic books, a year for a single storyline is a pretty long time. One thing that I talked about in the first year of the book was that it seemed to be allowed to do a little bit more serious storytelling than the Archie book or even the games even want to do. They were able to refer to characters dying during the events of Sonic Forces and some of the damage that had occurred during and after that game. And this arc very much continues that tradition, because this arc has been bleak. Sega had and still does have, apparently, a guideline for the Sonic comics that Sonic cannot truly lose. Eggman can temporarily gain the upper hand, but at the end of everything, at the end of the storyline, Eggman has to end up losing. And this story arc, I feel like, has really been pushing that idea to its limits, because while there have been very little victories overall, or where things haven't necessarily immediately gotten worse, looking back on this past year of the storyline, I'm hard-pressed to think of a point when I could really say that the heroes have won. For every small victory, like Sonic getting infected but being able to stave off the virus by just running really, really fast, there's something terrible that happens. In direct opposition to that, Tails was monitoring Sonic's biosigns with a device that would sort of try to get an insight into how his body destroys the virus as he runs. And basically, right on the cusp of that being able to develop a cure, the armband got destroyed, and then that was pretty much gone. When they had rounded up all of the survivors into the seemingly safe Resistance base, that ended up falling apart because of a guy who had already been infected that didn't want to be alone when he turned. That ended up resulting in Cream's mother, Vanilla, and Vector getting zombotted. Cream's mother especially, that scene was really, I think for a Sonic book, pretty harrowing. And for a young kid reading the book, it might really hit him. And they have continued that even recently. Tangle and Cream are the most recent to get hit by the virus. Cream's has been handled a lot less viscerally. We don't know exactly how it's going to play out because it only happened as of the most recent issue, and she's just in the very beginning stages of infection. But Tangle, the way it happened with her sort of reminds me of the end of Halo Reach, and she had already been infected and was just fighting off Zombots for as long as she could to help other people. And it just finally ends with her being fully infected. The real emotional hit that comes from that is when Whisper finds out about it. We'll just say she has quite the reaction. I mean, you can see it on screen, I guess. But yeah, it has been a very heavy storyline, especially for Sonic standards. It hasn't been, I think, super depressing. I wouldn't even put it as like a particularly dark moment in comic books, but for Sonic storytelling, it's been pretty dark. But it has been a very good storyline, although admittedly I have a couple of gripes with it. Chief among them is that it has been going on for a year, and it felt like, in a couple of places, it's felt like it's kind of dragging. Never too poorly, and usually immediately in the next issue there's some plot progression that makes it, that sort of negates that. But there have been a couple of points where I've gone, okay, this has been going on a while, are we almost close to the end? And then the other is the treatment of Shadow and how he's been portrayed during his really only appearance in this arc. Shadow ended up getting infected entirely because of his own stupidity, and this is as a result of one of Sega's mandates, apparently. They want Shadow to be written as this asshole Vegeta-type rival, even though it has never really fit with any of his characterizations before. Shadow is smug, and he thinks himself better than a lot of people, but at the same time, he's also well aware of when he's outgunned and when to retreat, and that was not the case in what happened when he got zombotted. That happened entirely because of bravado and thinking he could take a threat that was definitely much bigger than him. That I feel like generally, maybe less so Game Shadow because game characters don't really have defined personalities anymore, so much as they are singular character traits. But certainly old Comic Shadow would have looked at that and gone, I'm outnumbered here, and I will figure out a solution later. Those have been my only real complaints with it, and they haven't ruined it. It's just been little things that bug me where I just go, this is kind of meh. One thing that the first year of the book really liked to do was introduce new characters. In that first year alone, we had Rough and Tumble, and Tangle, Whisper, and Dr. Starleen. The second year of the book admittedly does much less of that, only really introducing one new character, Mimic, for the Tangle and Whisper miniseries. But I don't really think of that as much of a problem, because one of the things that plagued the post-reboot Archie book was introducing a lot of new characters that didn't really end up getting used. Now, I blame most of that on the sudden rush of needing to develop a new universe post-reboot and not really getting a chance to sit down and explore a lot of the characters. It didn't help that the book ended up getting canceled when there were still other plans that were going to be put forth. So to see that the IDW book has introduced a handful of characters and then stopped to develop them is a much needed breath of fresh air. Tangle and Whisper were introduced and disappeared for a little bit, but came back pretty soon. And Dr. Starleen, since his appearance, has been a very regular threat. Rough and Tumble haven't really shown up since the beginning of this arc, but I imagine we'll see them again after the end of it. The one new character we've gotten, Mimic, hasn't been very well developed on, but mostly because he was only in a 4-issue miniseries, and was really only greatly in, I'd say, 2 of those issues. And even still, we got a backstory and a general personality for him, and it's not like he's been killed off, so I could imagine him coming back at some point in the future. But on the topic of Mimic, I think the best thing that came out of the second year of the book was the Tangle and Whisper miniseries. I made it no secret in the first video that I really, really liked Tangle. I didn't talk as much about Whisper, but I was very much a fan of Whisper as well. So when it was announced that they were getting a miniseries, I was all on board. And even though I didn't necessarily keep up with it, because I was very bad at keeping up with comics, and still kind of am, having read the whole thing, it is very, very good. Tangle and Whisper are kind of very clearly written and intended to be like really close friends, so they play well off of each other, and they are a very good mix. Just from that miniseries and what we've seen of it what we've seen of them post that series and in the main series, their friendship, the relationship between the two of them, I think is going to be probably one of the best that's ever been seen in Sonic Comics, period. Because already I love any time when they're together, just because they, like I said, they play off of each other very well. It's kind of a generic stereotype of the super energetic one and the kind of quiet, reserved one. But just because it's a regular kind of dynamic does not mean that it can't be good, and it is done very, very well in the Archie book. Or in the IDW book, rather. Now, one thing I want to echo that I said at the end of the last video is that the IDW book has not totally filled the void that the Archie book left, but at the same time, I don't really expect it to fill that void greatly. I kind of talked about the IDW book in that first video, and still partially in this one, as though it's a replacement for the Archie book, but really looking at it, I don't really consider it a replacement. I think of it more of it as a successor, because it is trying to do different things. One thing that was brought up when the book was announced was if Ian Flynn would be sort of incorporating ideas that he had for the Archie book that never came to be into the IDW book. And if I recall correctly, he ended up saying that maybe that might happen, but generally he was going to be trying something new. And I feel like that's a good way to think about it. It really does feel like it's a different thing. So while I don't think that it's as good as the Archie book was in its best era, or even really does it fill what we lost, it is still a solid book in its own right and very worthy of existing. And like I said at the end of the last video, if you're in any way interested in Sonic characters and continue to be frustrated by the game's absolute refusal to do actual storylines, you should be reading the comics, because they are very, very good. So, that's all for now, and I will see you guys next time.